Moving on, our next session for the day is a fireside chat on the topic Effective Partnerships at the Heart of Innovation at Scale, where our speakers will deliberate on working as an ecosystem to create higher value for customers, building trusted partnerships, and experimenting with models. Our speakers for the session are Gagan Singh, EVP and Chief Product and Revenue Officer, McAfee, and Praveena Ladva, Group Chief Digital and Technology Officer, Swiss Re. Chairing the session is Shrisha George, Managing Director and Partner, Boston Consulting Group. Most recently, she has been pivotal in setting up and leading BCG's Bangalore office. Praveena has been instrumental in building and launching new businesses, fostering an agile culture, and advancing IPTIQ's technology capabilities. Praveena was appointed the Swiss Re Group Digital Transformation Officer in July 2020, where her focus was to build and go to market with digital solutions and ecosystems. She was appointed Group Chief Digital and Technology Officer and a member of the Group Executive Committee in January 2022. Gagan is the Executive Vice President, Chief Product and Revenue Officer at McAfee. In this role, Gagan leads product engineering, design, and go-to-market, creating holistic online protection products that provide lasting value to consumers and partners worldwide. It is a pleasure to have all three of you join us this morning. And without further ado, over to you, Shrisha.
Thank you, Justin, and very excited to be part of the NASSCOM GCC conclave this year. And I'm very privileged to host this session with two great speakers from the industry who's really been at the cutting edge of innovation and leveraging a lot of partnership and ecosystems to do that. So both Gagan, Praveena, welcome to the session. Let's use the next 20 odd minutes that we have to really get to know a little bit better, both within your organization, what is working, what is not working, and maybe, you know, a few learnings for the broader group of the audience here as well in terms of what's a few actions to take away. So Praveena, I'd love to start with you. You know, we've been talking about innovation, I think, in a few different ways over time. What I wanted to really get to understand from you is, you know, for innovation at scale, which is really where we are trying to get to. What is some of the elements that you're starting to see within your organization, and how is this really impacting, driving some of the changes within the org as well?
Yeah, no, great. And thank you, Sarisha. It's great to be here with everyone. So in terms of the topic of innovation, so I work for Swiss Re, and innovation is really at the heart of how we think about growing our business. But in terms of how it really becomes scalable and pervasive through the organization, what we find, it's got to be purpose-led. And what I mean by that is, why are we doing innovation in the first place? I think time has gone now where people thought, you know, there's the cool tech, there's a cool way of doing things. I think that in the current economic climate for any organization is hard. So we think about it in terms of what is the real customer problem or the client problem or the challenge or the opportunity, and start that at the heart. So that's the first thing I would say, is be really clear on the purpose and be really clear on why you are doing something. And then the topic of innovation. Sometimes people think innovation is erratic and very creative and you can do everything in different ways. In fact, I think it's the opposite. You have to be quite focused, quite systemic about how you go about solving a problem. So that's a third ingredient, I would say. So having a process, an innovation process, then we have one which is well defined and that everyone follows and is stage gate. And the last thing I would say is culture. So are we thinking about things in the right way to develop things and learn fast and be brave enough to stop things if they're not working? So those are the three insights I would say that are helpful for us in what we do, but also allow innovation to scale across the organization.
Great, thanks, Praveena. I love the know when to stop. I think that's some great insight there. Gagan, maybe to you, you know, this has really become the buzzwords, right? Ecosystem, partnerships. Why in this context? Why in this context of innovation? And, you know, how do you at McAfee really leverage this?
I love Praveena's comment around purpose-driven innovation. I think, and being able to say no to more things than you say yes to has got to be at the heart of any sort of larger planning that you do. Tied into that is a self-awareness of what are the core capabilities that you have within your organization, and what can you lean on through your partners to expand that capability set. So there are some choices you can make internally where you have certain strengths and you want to go into a new business, but you also lack certain capabilities that may be essential. And I think partners can really help you expand or multiply your own capability set to break into a new market, break into a new product segment, et cetera. And I think we have a term internally that we use called co-imagination, where we do look at newer markets, newer product segments, where perhaps a partner can either have a differentiated ability to get into that market, or they have a differentiated capability set that can allow us to amplify our impact. And we look at that as a very key pillar in our innovation thinking, if you will. And so I think, it's beyond buzzwords, because I do think there is a legitimate reason for why you can bring in certain partners to break new ground.
Got it.
Yeah.
And Gagan, maybe I'll just get you to build on that a bit. I think, before we started the session, you were talking about your growth versus your peers and how some of these partnerships have helped. Can you give us some examples on, what kind of partners? And you gave us one idea of new markets, but are there other ways to think about this?
Yeah, I think go-to-market channels, for instance, was having diversified go-to-market opportunities really helped us through COVID. Most of our competitors choose to go to consumers directly, as in, they have marketing budgets and they try to acquire those customers by themselves. But we have a large ecosystem of partners, whether it's telcos and ISPs, whether it's retail outlets, e-tailers, our OEM manufacturers, as in PC manufacturers who pre-install our product, and having had that diversified sort of portfolio of go-to-market vectors really helped us accelerate during a time when everyone else was sort of retrenching. And I think that's a great example, in my view, of a go-to-market model that leans more on partnerships than just sort of go it alone, which gave us a significant momentum coming out of COVID than perhaps we would have had if we had just insisted on going it alone.
Got it. And Praveena, you have both a B2B view of the world and a B2C. How does the context play out differently?
Yeah, I mean, I think so I totally agree with what Gagan said in terms of partnerships in the commercial world today are critical to every organization's commercial success. And the reason I say that is in every partnership, whether it's in the B2B context or whether it's in the B2C context, for a partnership, it's around how do you create a win-win for both organizations. And one of the key things that we find is when setting up a partnership is, are we clear around the aligned interest? And are the community forming that partnership coming with skills, whether it's distribution, whether it's knowledge, whether it's technology know-how, are they coming together to build something together that is aligned and they're both playing to their strengths? So to give you a real example, one of the strategic partnerships we have is with Microsoft. And now everybody will use Microsoft Cloud, but what we also look is, how can we play in the digital marketplace with what we bring as Swiss Re, which is our risk insights, our risk knowledge, our analytical skills. And what Microsoft clearly brings is scale and know-how in their markets. So how can we together help society at large? And that's an example of creating a win-win scenario for the organizations that are play. And we see that playing out in the B2B world, but also the B2B2C world as well.
Got it. I think the ones that are working well, obviously, builds the confidence and, gives us that trust to do more of it. But this is, a very different mentality to partner, right? More risk, you're exposing yourself to other organization. Gagan, any thoughts on, how to do this well? And I mean, if there are any examples that didn't work, and in hindsight, if there was a better way to set it up?
I think, look, I approach every partnership with a very clear-eyed view on where we're going to cooperate and what are the boundaries of that cooperation look like. And if you define those well up front, then you can have an acknowledgement that you may compete with that partner on various other things. But building that trust up front and having that clarity of a zone of cooperation, if you will, you have to assume that every organization and every individual sort of act in their own self-interest. And if you can align those interests, and I like the way Praveena put it, if you can find a win-win sort of opportunity where those interests are aligned, they don't have to be perfectly aligned. They don't have to be aligned across the entire spectrum of your market opportunity. But if you define the areas where you will collaborate, perhaps there's other areas where you will compete. And I think, Microsoft is a great example for us, where we collaborate with Microsoft enormously, both on technology, both on distribution, et cetera. But we also compete on some of the product capabilities that they're bringing to the market. But having clarity on what are the areas where you will collaborate and where you perhaps may compete upfront, I think helps build more trust, which essentially is I think one of the key pillars of any successful partnership in the long run.
Got it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, maybe if I can just build on that. So, one of the things is that having that clear framework up front. I think sometimes the things that organizations underestimate in partnerships is how different organizational cultures can sometimes work against each other. Because, not two corporates are the same. And this less comes across when it's two big corporates, but if it's a corporate and a startup, imagine that partnership, where the whole reason you're doing a partnership with a startup or a newer company, a fresher company, is you want that intel, you want that invigoration or something that you don't have. But then if you subsume it by the corporate machinery, well, you're destroying why you wanted that partnership in the first place. So the one thing I would say is don't underestimate how both teams will need to work together to really drive out that value that you have aligned on to start with.
Got it. And Praveena, I think, you've triggered a very curious side of the partnership, right? Like we've spoken about the Microsofts and the large ones, but you also brought up the startup piece. If there is an example you can share in terms of, some of the smaller startup sort of partnerships you're doing, and how, what kind of skills adjacencies are you leveraging there?
Yeah, so I think this is quite prevalent in the industry, and it's clearly started with startups in the banking industry. And there was always a fear that the startups were going to kill the big banks. Right. And essentially what we found is the startups, yes, there were startup banks and neobanks, but what we found is the technology, the capability, expertise, what they did was solve specific problems along the value chain. And now in the insurance industry, I think we're seeing exactly the same. There are a few newer insurance companies, we all know that. And in our Swiss Re context, we have iptiQ, which is our B2B2C brand, and it's a digital platform. So there are examples of how these innovations happen. But my theory is they solve for problems that the corporates have that are customer driven. So I go back to what I said. It's all about what are you trying to solve for is the critical thing that we need to be clear on. One specific example I would give is, one of our businesses had a real problem tracking the customer traffic, and why insurance is a complex product and people were dropping off the website. And so we came across a small startup based out of Israel. We brought their technology guys in, and we then said to them, this is the problem we're trying to solve for. They had a unique piece of tech, which was a learning system, but instead we put it on top of our platform. And then they changed our website, and now we were able to see the conversion rate, the dropout rate. So there's a specific example of a small startup solving a customer problem, us taking it, collaborating with them and making it work. And we do this all the time. So in our organization, we have a prototype lab where we have 3-week time-boxed pieces of work where startups come in, early stage serious funding organizations come in and work with our engineers to come up with MVPs. So I think it's doing it regularly, you learn more.
Great. No, that's really good, good theme on how you're leveraging, and that too globally, right? I mean, sitting out of somewhere, having centers all across the world, leveraging tech out of Israel. That's a great example. Gagan, any examples you can share on, the different types of partnerships that are coming your way and, for your product?
Yeah, wide spectrum. I mean, as I alluded to Microsoft, we work with all PC manufacturers, which is a completely different relationship. We use them as a distribution channel. We also work with, a handful of startups where if you have a point capability that you're trying to develop and you're trying to develop in a rapid, accelerated timeline, sometimes it makes a ton of sense. And great example about having a specific problem and identifying a startup that's focused on solving just that problem can be a tremendous lever, because if you are a large business, you become a valuable introduction, valuable key marquee customer. You can and there is a lot of eagerness on their part to be able to aid your purpose that you're trying to achieve. But it's also a lever for them to sort of scale up. So our partnerships, I mean, we are a partner-led business, and whether it's new innovations, whether it's new go-to-market opportunities, we certainly leave ourselves open to the possibility of bringing in new partners where perhaps we don't have that capability set. Of course, in the long term, you have to build a healthy portfolio of your own capabilities and others that you want to work with. But I think partners can be an enormous accelerator, whether it's getting something to market faster, whether it's allowing you to be focused on your core set of products, and you can perhaps bring in a partner who can fill in a gap that you had in your portfolio. So I think it's an enormous lever that most businesses overlook for various reasons.
Excellent. And I'll just get us to switch gears a little here. And, we are on the theme of capabilities and how we are leveraging, startups to do that to the large tech. Both of you are leveraging India and your capability centers in the Indian market and beyond. Very curious to kind of get your view, and maybe Praveena, we'll start with you. How has the GCCs been playing a part in building out innovation and more broadly supporting the next wave of growth for you?
Yeah, no, thank you. And it's integral to our strategy. So we have a center in Bangalore, and I think it's circa 2000. And I'm super excited because we've announced, I think it was last month, that we're opening a second center in Hyderabad. And that's driven by the demand from my peers across the organization for that need of talent, expertise that we can find in the market. And the kind of activities we're looking for, and it's not just what one would traditionally expect. We have sometimes what's known as, frontline in those locations. Right. So we have everyone from underwriters, actuaries, finance, and it's not just what would have been previously more servicing back office technology type kind of capabilities. We're really coming to the forefront of our value chain. And the other thing we're doing is using as a transformation hub, because that's where we're finding the skill sets and the eagerness to learn and the capabilities. So for us, it's core to what we do. It's an expansion strategy for us in the region to leverage all the good things that we've experienced in Bangalore and that we can see we can get in Hyderabad. And, you know, my personal conviction is I've seen this in other parts of India. I used to run big centers out of Pune. And so I know this is doable and viable. And that's why it's so core to what we do.
Great. Now, great to hear also the kind of capabilities that that you're using. And Gagan, I know, you know, you guys are doing the same. You know, what's the kind of, you know, partnership in this context, right? That's working well.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Bangalore is one of our key innovation centers. It's come a long way in the last 10 years or so, I would say, where we're building our new leading edge innovations out of Bangalore, and the quality of the talent, the creativity. I think all of those have come a long way, and a lot of that has also been helped by the Indian startup ecosystem, which is flourishing. And I have friends in venture capital, and they follow this space quite closely. I think that startup ecosystem, and quite frankly, I think people moving jobs is yes, as a employer, it can be painful, but it allows the talent to nurture a whole range of skills. And that entrepreneurial mindset, which I think is really what you need in a rapidly evolving technology landscape. So when you are able to win that battle for talent, the quality of folks that we're seeing in our pipeline and in our employee base is remarkable, and is probably it is competitive with the best anywhere else we see. And we have offices in Canada and in Silicon Valley and in other parts of the world. And it's really incredibly encouraging to see that ecosystem flourish.
Great. And Praveena, and I think, Gagan, you just touched upon it, right? I mean, not only do you have the access to talent, but you also have access to some of the cutting edge startup work that's happening. Is that starting to come together as well as a broader ecosystem?
Yes, I think it is, because I think Gagan touched on it in terms of, you know, often we see colleagues going to join these startup ecosystems, which I'm like,
right.
Oh, it's a loss to us as an organization. I don't want to see that. But interestingly, what happens, and then they come back with all that wealth of knowledge, or we get connected. And I think whether that circulation of talent is really helpful and is more connected. And the other thing I see is, in the world that is more connected, that is happening more and more. You know, so what I probably see now, I never used to see like 5-10 years ago. So I think there's definite use cases, and traditionally, I know Gagan sitting on the West Coast, people normally go Silicon Valley, let's go there, or let's go to London. Now I think it's coming in, or Israel, and I touched on Israel earlier. Yes. But now the Indian startup ecosystem has really, I think it's booming, and it's actually quite a big competitor for talent with the corporates.
Absolutely.
And building on Praveena's comment around, you know, more folks starting companies or going to work for startups and coming back. I think one big shift that I've seen is in risk tolerance, and having a different way of evaluating your risks that you are willing to take, perhaps with your career or with technologies. It just leads to a different mindset, which I think can be enormously helpful when you're in technology in particular, because you think much broader than perhaps a more safer path, and it allows you to push the boundaries of innovation in a way that perhaps was not seen before, which is quite wonderful.
Yeah, that's a very nuanced view of, you know, some of the benefits of the circulation of talent that Praveena spoke about. I think we are on the last couple of minutes, so wanted to get from both of you on, you know, I think the way you spoke about how you're leveraging some of the GCCs and the broader partnerships and ecosystem is truly quite mature compared to where some of the industries and where some of the companies are. You know, for the audience listening, who are all kind of leaders in the GCC market, but at different points of maturity of how they are getting leveraged, Any thoughts on, how do you truly move to this next frontier, right? What's the 3 things that it takes to build strong relationships with HQ, to be truly part of some of these strategic priorities, transformation, and leverage some of these partnerships in doing so as well? So maybe the top 3 things that you can leave with our audience. And Gagan, Praveena, feel free to go first.
And maybe I'll jump
Go
in.
ahead,
So
Praveena.
so my couple would be, so I would say continue the transparency. I think the clearer we are in communication, the better it is for everyone. Nobody likes shocks or surprises. Everybody wants transparency. So I think that's the first thing. Second thing, I would say in this community, share best practice, because I think together we can become stronger. Often, people talk about what's your attrition rate, what's happening, what are the trends. Share those trends and learn from each other, especially when we're at different levels of maturity. And then last thing I would say is take accountability. I think where we take accountability to deliver things and make them happen, I think that speaks volume. And I think all of those 3 things are happening, but I would say maintaining focus on all those 3 things would be great.
Great. Gagan?
I would say, echoing some of the comments we made earlier, be purpose-driven and have a clear sense of why you're getting into a partnership and what are the boundaries that you want to work within. So which then further leads into having a more transparent view on here's the things we will collaborate and here's the things we will compete on. And the last thing I would say, give back to the ecosystem, because as was we said earlier, there's a lot of talent that leaves, that comes back. I think over time, if you share those learnings and you share those practices, it benefits the entire industry as a whole, and it sort of lifts all boats. And I think that evolving that. And it's, while it's come a long way, I don't think it's quite as mature, which actually in a way is a good thing, because you don't necessarily have to replicate the blueprints of the past, but you can find a new path which is much more tailor-made and suited to the environment today. But the more you share, the better it allows a whole bunch of other smart people to take those learnings and build on top of that.
Excellent. No, thank you so much. I think a lot of great things, at least I've taken away, whether it comes to Gagan, the McAfee model of, really being partner led. And I think Praveena reinforced with the co-imagination model, right? So the why is really quite clear in terms of, you can really leverage capability across. I think that's something the audience really will resonate with. 2, I think just thinking about the GCC model in itself as being your engine for innovation, for transformation, for advanced capabilities. I think starting to hear you say on, how you're leveraging some of this and going more broadly and broadening that horizon as well. Just fantastic to hear for the community, but also very encouraging for people to kind of move up the value chain. And finally, I think, the whole concept of accountability and making sure it's a win-win at all points. I think just a great kind of end-to-end view of how do we leverage the partnerships, but also how do we get the GCC model getting mature over time as well. Personally, just great to have gotten the time to spend with both of you, and thank you for sharing so openly some of the examples and the range of partnerships that you're looking at, all the way from the Microsofts to the startups. I think it just really opens your mind to the kind of ecosystem that we can build. Thank you again for the session.
Thank you, Srisha.
Very informative.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you, Praveena. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you, Srisha, and our panelists, Gagan and Praveena, for that engaging discussion.